Welcome in to a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by the one, the only HoosierIllustrated.com. I am the one, the only John Alden. Whether that is a good thing or not, that is up to you to decide. I'd be willing to bet that more than one John Alden might be too many. But as that comes out of my mouth, I'm remembering, or just, I guess, realizing I'm not the only John Alden. I'm John William Alden III. I'm the third in a line of John Aldens. So welcome in again. Happy Monday. I hope you've had a great weekend. And I hope you've had a great start to your week because as I tend to mention frequently, this is another episode that is getting released later in the day. And I think beginning right now, I'm going to stop saying that because you've heard me mention before that it bothers me that when I have to release later in the day, none of you all care. I know that. None of you all have told me that, but I know that that's how this works. You're just like, John, get on with it. I know you have a busy life. I know you have a crazy work schedule. Just get on with what you got planned for us today. So I'm going to pledge right now, beginning with future episodes, I am no longer going to apologize for late releases because that's just the way it is with my current work schedule. And it's not going to change anytime soon. If it does, I may mention that, but let's get into the good stuff, shall we? Because this is a great day for Indiana sports for many reasons. The small reason is that it's Indiana basketball game day. Minnesota plays against Indiana at home, on the road, home for Indiana. Simon Scott Assembly Hall to open Big Ten play. We'll get to that a little bit later. But of course, the big news of the day, the week, I mean, really for the year, we could say for Indiana sports is the fact that the Indiana Hoosiers football program, it became official on Sunday afternoon. Right around maybe 12:30, we found out the official placement of where Indiana would land in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. And that's exactly what they did. They landed in the field, which, of course, go back to the beginning of the summer. I mean, just go a year ago today. Think about how much this program was in turmoil. I mean, a year ago today, we already had Kurt Cignetti. So maybe at this point, things were already on the upswing. But the bad taste of what had happened during the final few years of the Tom Allen tenure, it made Indiana fans wonder, like, will we ever get to taste real success? I mean, we've had, little tidbits here and there of, glimpses of success. And the further and further we removed ourselves from the 2020 season, the more and more that seemed like a fluke more than anything. You could back it up a little bit with the season before by realizing, okay, that team before went 8-4 in 2019, but that's about as good as we'd ever seen Indiana football, at least in the most, the last 20 to 30 years. Nothing of real substance. And when I say real substance, I just mean like you're at the upper echelon of the sport. None of that had happened since the 60s, right? The 1967 Rose Bowl appearance where they went on to face USC and eventually lose, I believe, to O.J. Simpson's team. Am I making that up? I don't think that's I think I know that as fact, but for some reason, every time I realize that that's who they played against, it just kind of blows my mind. Like, wow, they faced O.J. Simpson in the Rose Bowl. And of course, we all know how he ended up working out with his life. And, we're not going to talk about O.J. Simpson today, but that is the last, iconic player, not the last iconic player that Indiana faced, but whenever Indiana was good, they faced somebody who was that well known, of course, or became well known eventually for the worst reasons possible. But Indiana gets the number 10 seed in the first ever 12-team playoff. They will go on the road, not very far. They're going to travel just a little ways up north, as people say, right? Up north. I don't know how many people around here say that, but, we have fun here sometimes on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Up near Chicago, South Bend, to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish on Friday of next week, 8 p.m., they are kicking off the college football playoff. And I don't know if you can tell in my voice right now. Maybe it's not super evident, but I'm excited. I cannot believe that this is where we're at. I'm not going to say what I've been saying the last, I don't know, I feel like I say it every other episode. Like, just imagine being here, all the way back in August. I've, used that narrative to death. There's no reason to continue to, speak about like, oh, wow, we can't believe we made it here. Yeah, we can't believe it. But this is the new reality for Indiana football, right? I'm going to try to sit up a little bit. I keep losing my breath. But this is the new reality for Indiana football. And I don't know if they're going to be as good as they are this year, every year under Curt Cignetti. But I think one thing is for sure. As long as he is the head coach in Bloomington, you're going to see a competitive football team. You're going to see a team that cares and competes and strives to be the best, not only in the conference, but potentially at the national level as well. And they're going to get, I was going to say their first test of it on Friday against Notre Dame next week, but they've already had a couple of tests. We saw them go up against one of the best teams in the country in Ohio State and unfortunately fall pretty short due to several miscues. And of course, you're playing against one of the best teams in the nation that just was able to bury you after you made a few mistakes. And I want to play some sound from the head coach himself, him speaking with the media shortly after he found out that Indiana was going to be in the playoff and where they were going to end up playing at. Here's what Cignetti had to say. I really enjoyed this soundbite yesterday.
I think it's a great game for the state in general, for Indiana and Notre Dame to be playing in the college football playoff. This is the playoffs. You win or go home, and we're in it to win it. I mean, our odds of probably making the college football playoff at the beginning of the season, I don't know what they were, but they're pretty darn low, I'm sure. We were picked 17th out of 18th teams in the Big Ten. Our odds of winning the next 4 games are probably significantly higher than they were of making the college football in the first playoffs in the first place. So we've climbed that mountain, right? So regardless of who we were going to play in the first round, the objective is the same.
I mean, what a thing to say to really, that him mentioning like the odds. And there's one other thing I'm going to throw in there here after I finish this point up about odds and somebody who made a little bit of money, not me, but him mentioning that the likelihood of Indiana getting to this point and then comparing it to an increase of likelihood of moving on and winning the entire thing. If that doesn't get you fired up, then I don't know what does, because, and again, Mitchell Paige will be on with me shortly, and we'll talk more in depth about a lot of this stuff. But I mean, 4 games, that's a third of a season. It's kind of crazy to think that if Indiana makes it all the way to the national championship, which easier said than done, of course, they're going to play in several more games. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, again, it's win or go home, so it could just be one game here and the next Friday, the 20th, and then that's it. But if they keep going, I mean, this football season will go deep into January, of course. I mean, there's a whole nother month and a half of football, of course, bowl games and stuff, not just the college football playoff, but there's a lot of college football left. And I do want to say this, it does feel like it does a disservice to college basketball. And this is the first season I've really understood why, like, some of the major football schools that are competing for national titles year in and year out, why it's hard for them to care about basketball on the same level that, schools like Indiana do, Kentucky, Louisville, a lot of the local schools around here, at least where I'm at. I mean, that they've grown a lot of their tradition on basketball because they've had mediocre or worse football programs for the majority of their existence. And I'm sure many of you have seen this already. There is a person who posted this on social media. I'm sure I saw it on Twitter. I'm sure it could have been elsewhere as well, but someone screenshotted a bet that they made with a sports book back in mid-August of they bet $110 to, or that Indiana would make the college football playoff. And of course, now that's fully come to fruition. This particular human being was able to cash in on over 10.5 grand's worth of cold hard cash from simply going out on a whim and, saying, what the hell? Why not? Why not Indiana? If Curt Cignetti's going to talk this big game, let's see if he can back it up. And I'm going to put my money where his mouth is. I didn't say that. Maybe that's what the particular human being who made that bet and won that bet was saying. So shout out to that guy who, cashed in not only as a fan, it seems like, but in a big way financially. I mean, 10 grand, a lot of people could use an extra 10 grand. Am I wrong? So without further ado, let's go ahead. We'll continue the football conversation here with Mitchell Paige here. And then on the other side, we will give Indiana basketball its due because, as I mentioned, it is Indiana basketball game day tonight. Indiana taking on Minnesota to open up Big Ten conference play here in, almost said mid. I mean, we're kind of in mid-December, right? It's almost the 10th. Well, it's still early December. It really doesn't matter. But yeah, we'll talk some Indiana basketball on the other side and maybe get into a few other things before we wrap up today's edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Because it is a long interview. It's a conversation. We have Mitchell on each and every week. About half the show's worth with Mitchell Paige. Because, it's a celebration of Indiana football today. So if you're somebody who is Indiana basketball only, I apologize, but I also don't apologize. This is my show. And I know many of you are Indiana football fans too, and you're enjoying this ride that the Hoosiers are going on. So I'll stop blabbering. Let's go ahead and bring in our man, Mitchell Paige, and continue this, again, celebration of the Indiana Hoosiers football program. Joining us from space once again in his very beautifully lit room here on, of course, recording this on a Sunday evening before releases on a Monday, it is none other than Mitchell Paige. Happy college football playoff day, my friend.
Yeah, we're here. All the who's in, who's out. Your team's not better than our team because we have a bunch of whatever. Doesn't matter. It's over.
It's over.
Time to go prove it. Indiana
gets the 10 seed, will travel up to South Bend, the number 7 Notre Dame squad that both you and I said leading up to it, we wanted to see that matchup happen. Of course, in an ideal world, we would have loved to see Indiana host a game. Of course, that was very much as unlikely as could be with their resume. But hey, they got probably one of the best storyline matchups that you could have in the first round, at least when you compare it to the other 3 games, SMU, Penn State, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Clemson and Texas. Who would have ever thought that the Hoosiers and the Fighting Irish would be duking it out in a first-round CFP game?
Yeah, and I think it adds a ton to it that it's one of the home games, whether it was at Indiana or at Notre Dame. I think it makes it more historic being at Notre Dame. Just unfortunately, Indiana Stadium doesn't have that yet. I know the get-in prices are telling the story that it's the game of the first round for sure. It's like $1,100 already. We're 9 hours after it was announced, and prices have gone through the roof.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, but it's good. It's a great thing for Indiana football. What a fun! I can't imagine being on the team right now. The kind of butterflies that you have going into an environment like that, tradition, night game. In a team that you can,
and you're opening not only night game, you are the opening game of the college football playoff. The only game played on a Friday. Of course, you mentioned a night game, 8 p.m. on either ABC or ESPN. You're kicking off the festivities in the first ever 12-team playoff, and you have the chance to make a statement against your. They're not really a traditional rival, but they're an in-state school that they're the one that gets all of the preseason buzz each and every year. They're kind of the elite of the elite when it comes to, their fan base, what they've done in their past. And of course you have this startup Indiana program that's having the best season of its entire existence with the first year head coach. Not ever as a head coach, but with Indiana, of course, with Curt Cignetti. It's legitimately a David and Goliath story. But at the same time, these are 2 teams that should be very well suited for a good matchup, I feel like.
Yeah, David and Goliath based on tradition alone. This is not a David Indiana team, and I think Notre Dame's going to find that out pretty quick. I think they're physical running the ball, but just in the couple of games that I've watched, even in the blowout wins against Army and Navy, they're up 50-0, sure, but there's just no real threat from the other team, and they're good on the defensive line, but I think there's a lot of ways that you can expose this team. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. Not necessarily rivals on the field, but one thing that I think is important to mention is it's going to be some rivalry among the fan base, because there's a lot of the worst kinds of fans, the IU basketball, Notre Dame football fans, that have seen how much fun we're having, and they've been miserable because they are miserable for so long that they're like, oh, let me just dabble in whatever the football team's doing, and I want to make an announcement. You're not welcome right now. You can come. You've been allowed all year to be on the bandwagon. You're not allowed. You get out of here. Go over there. If you've ever cheered for Notre Dame, get out of here. We don't want you. You can come back next week when we play Georgia, because you'll be sitting on the couch. But
you know who falls into this category is our friend Joe Lincoln, who used to do This Week in Indiana Football.
It's the worst kind of – it's the worst. It's my least favorite section of fan. I also think – I was thinking about this earlier, and I'm in the mood to talk some trash, because we've listened to those guys talk about how bad Indiana football is for 30 years now, and they've won as many cool things as Indiana has in the last 30 years. So they just chirp. So that's kind of where my mindset is. Is there another school that has more fans that are diehard believers that didn't actually go to school there than Notre Dame? Does that make sense? That's a good
question. Yeah, I get what you're saying, because I do think a lot of people, especially a lot of college football fans that didn't go to Notre Dame, sometimes they, or at some point in their life, they decided they were going to be Fighting Irish fans, more than likely because they were also Catholic. I feel like, especially around here where I live in Louisville, very large Catholic community. There are a lot of people. Yes, you have Louisville and Kentucky fans around here, but you'll hear people say that they're rooting for Notre Dame on occasion just because they love the Catholic affiliation.
Yeah, and that's fair. If that's your reason, cool. But I don't think that's the reason for a lot of people, at least in Indianapolis. You say down there where you're living, maybe. But it's just so funny. That's because there's a lot of fans of other teams, Ohio State, Oregon, that didn't necessarily go there, but they're just fans of the program. But it feels like with Notre Dame fans, they like, if you went to Notre Dame, you've deserved or you've earned the right to be kind of an elitist, like unbelievable school. You worked really hard to get into that school. Now you graduated. You kind of earned that. But the fans that didn't go there, that have kind of held on to that elitist mentality without actually doing any of the work, that section of fan base is just kind of interesting. I don't think anyone else has that with people that didn't go there. It's just kind of a bizarre. Notre Dame fans are just so interesting because they're everywhere.
It's kind of like Duke basketball fans.
It's the
really a lot like Duke basketball fans.
It's the exact same mentality. Never had a chance to get in there, but take on this I'm still better than you mentality, and they act that way. I think there's going to be some hostility in a couple weeks of the tailgate lots.
Speaking of kind of the attitude of I'm better than you, I think Indiana has the coaching advantage just in terms of, Marcus Freeman's kind of been, I don't want to call him a crybaby. That's not really what I'm trying to get at here, but he's a lot more reserved. He's not going to come at you guns a-blazing the way that Curt Cignetti is. And whenever things have gone wrong for Notre Dame in the last few years, he takes a lot of heat and he takes it quickly. And this year he responded to it in about as good of a way as he could have after that Northern Illinois loss. Of course, you rattle off 10 wins in a row, and now you find yourself hosting a playoff game. So they're having their first real success with Marcus Freeman. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think you're going to have any like rivalrying between Cignetti and Marcus Freeman. I don't think that's really something people would expect, but it will be interesting over the course of the next couple of weeks just to kind of hear what both of them say about the matchup. If Cignetti does what he normally does and gives us at least one golden soundbite over the course of the next few weeks, I don't think he'll say something, it's not going to be anything along the lines of whenever he was talking about UCLA in the Rose Bowl going into an old stadium and kicking somebody's ass. I mean, maybe he will say that. Who knows? But there would be reason to. Of course, when you go into Notre Dame, you have that same exact scenario where you're going into a very historical place that Indiana typically does not go to play a team with a lot of tradition. But that is exactly what he's going to want to do. Go into that old place and kick their ass. Whether he says that into a microphone or not, that remains to be seen, of course.
Yeah, this is not a rivalry on the field or between the coaches. It just isn't.
By the way, shout out to you finding your microphone.
Yeah, my bad.
I wasn't going to say anything. I just thought maybe you had it shut off.
No, it was way over there. I was kind of scrambling to get started for the show. This probably sounds way better. So, and it's better. My nonsensical ramblings at the beginning of the show weren't worth listening to anyways.
You sounded fine. I just thought your mic was off.
Yeah. It's another game for the players. And I think Notre Dame feels the same way about Indiana that Indiana does about Notre Dame. It just isn't a game that happens, even though we're so close to each other and our fan bases interact so frequently. These are two programs that just don't really cross paths in recruiting on the field. It just doesn't, for whatever reason, happen. You don't see them in the same room very often. So, yeah, my guess is Indiana's going to handle this exactly like they did UCLA, just without a 4-hour flight. It'll be a 4-hour bus ride. So it just is, and I do think it'd be pretty sick if they took a plane. That's a weird, random thought I had, because that was the best part of the bowl games. We would take these monstrous planes, and you take all the donors and all these people, and they were huge. And I had the lay down seat. I was in the first class or whatever.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're going to take a big plane from Indianapolis to South.
What would be the equivalent? Like, what's a luxury bus look like? Do those even exist in the state of Indiana?
Yeah. There's we took the nice buses for sure.
Okay.
That we would take them to Purdue. They're a private jet on wheels, but they're not a jet. So I'd be curious. That'd be interesting. What a waste of money that would be. But to go back to what I was saying, this is a rivalry amongst fans. That's what makes it so interesting. The teams probably don't have any animosity. They just see them as another team. But the fan bases, they know. There's people that have been cheating on their squad, cheering for Notre Dame, trying to cover it up now because they want to join the Cignetti train. A rivalry is brewing outside the stadium, and that's what makes it fun.
I think it's going to be so contentious leading up to kickoff. I mean, just because of the anticipation in general. For
fans or players?
It's not going to be anything like, where you saw the flag planting a couple of weeks ago. It's not going to be that. It's going to be a lot of chitter chatter amongst the state of Indiana, I feel like, over the course of the next couple of weeks.
There's no other state but Indiana right now. If you live here, this is the only thing that's happening for the next 3 weeks. Everyone's going to have an opinion. In my job, I'm going to be going into med spas and plastic surgery centers, asking them what side of the river do they fall on. And if they fall on the wrong side, I'm not going in there. That's the way that the state's going to be. I think it's going to get very divided, very contentious. This is about the most fun matchup we could have asked for, I think.
I saw a shirt that came out. I don't remember who put it out, but
Catholics versus cigarettes.
Versus cigarettes. Yeah, of course. The newest edition of Catholics versus convicts, of course.
I may have to get myself one. I got to find a way into the stadium. I don't know how I'm going to do
so it. I saw you put something out on Facebook earlier. So what is your – I mean, obviously you're trying to just gauge anybody and everybody, but what are you hoping, happens in terms of you finding your way into – it's just called Notre Dame Stadium, right? There's not anything unique about the stadium name, correct?
Yes, correct. Which I respect.
Okay.
I respect. But yeah, just Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend, Indiana. I don't really have a plan. We still got a couple weeks.
I think you'll be able to find your way there.
I'm
Do you
planning.
think this is going to be a solo venture of yours, or do you think you're bringing the family along?
Definitely not the family.
Okay.
Laura would probably be the only one. I don't know if I would go without her,
Okay.
but I'm slippery. We'll see
Slippery Mitchell Paige. Will he
Yeah, we'll
find
see
his
what
way
happens.
into Notre Dame Stadium? I want to ask you about the rest of the playoff field. I guess just first off, do you think they got it right, or is there anything you wish they would have done differently?
No, I think they're absolutely right. I think the top 12 was solidified going into this weekend. You can't punish a team. The precedent that it sets to punish a team and keep them out of the playoffs because they lost their conference championship, you just can't do that. And if you're an Alabama fan, tough. Don't
Don't
lose
lose by
the
3
teams that
scores to
stink.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, Nick Saban going on there saying, well, we just won't schedule hard non-conference games. Do you know what Alabama's schedule was? Non-conference?
I know they have Wisconsin and Mercer. I don't know who else they had.
Yeah, it's teams like that. They don't play anybody, like Louisiana Lafayette or something. They were 4-0 in non-conference. That wasn't what was keeping you out.
That's what I'm saying. I don't understand that
4-0.
argument. That had nothing to do with what happened with them this year.
Nothing. Literally nothing. The people that are making that argument are the same dumb people that are saying the SEC's strength of schedule is really good because the committee and everybody just ranks them, even though they're playing each other. So we really don't know how good these teams are. They just rank them all in the top 10. So now all the teams are having all these top 10 wins. That Georgia-Texas game was one of the grossest football games I've ever watched. They have no ability at quarterback. Georgia's receivers drop the ball. It's every SEC team in a nutshell. They're all really athletic and really fast on defense, and they're horrendous on offense. They can do nothing with the ball, can go nowhere. Outside of maybe Alabama, I think they're the only one that maybe can do something on offense because the quarterback just gets in a rhythm. But if he's not in rhythm, they definitely fall in this category. There's just not really any – I don't see any of those teams. Like I think a lot of people were nervous about going to Georgia for Indiana.
I'm not nervous. After the Georgia Tech, and I know it's a rivalry game, but after
Anything can
Georgia Tech
happen.
took them to 8 overtimes, and really, it shouldn't have even come to that. They should have taken care of business before it came down to overtimes. But Georgia had to claw their way back into that game.
Yeah, I'm just not. It's really, and we'll look back on this in a couple of months after we know what happened and there's a national champion, whoever it is. But if you look at the path, just take a little gander at what we need to beat Notre Dame, then beat Georgia, who I think is very beatable in a neutral site game where there'll be at least a 50-50 split of fans.
There's not a team in the 12-team playoff that is unbeatable.
Oregon's about the only one.
And I know they're undefeated, but I mean, Penn State played them about as well as you could have.
Correct. And I think Oregon, you have to play perfect to beat them, which is what Penn State basically did, and they still lost.
Yeah.
I think that Oregon might give up some things, but they're about the only team that is, I mean, you got to be turned on and kind of be perfect to beat them. But you go to Georgia, who knows? Then you
got a backup quarterback. I don't know if Carson Beck will be playing by the time Indiana or Notre Dame gets to them.
For a second, it may be better if their backup was not playing, but I think their backup is the backup for a reason, and I don't think Carson Beck is very good anyways. So very beatable team. Then probably get Penn State, who showed
I think Boise State, and maybe this is just me watching what they did against UNLV the other night, but I think Boise State and really Ashton Genty is the reason for a lot of this. I think they'd run all over Penn State. And I know Penn State's good, but I mean, you saw what Oregon's offense did to their defense the other night. Tom Allen-led defense, I should mention.
Yeah, but they can spread you out. Oregon's got speed at the receivers, and they beat them in the second and third level. The interior, the meat of that defense is where they dominate. That's what they did to Ohio State as well. That's why they kept it close. I'm hoping. I think Boise State's fun, and I think Indiana would handle Boise State a lot better than they would Penn State. But I just don't. I think Penn State just has to be physical. As long as they play physical, they're going to have a really good chance to win that game, is my guess. Boise State has good players. Cam Camper's out there. I know he was one of my favorites.
Yeah, I forgot Cam Camper's on their team.
They've got skill. I just don't know. Their identity is running the ball. I just don't know that they can. I don't know if you can do that.
If a team with a good defense stops the run more so than you would expect, then maybe they have. I couldn't even tell you Boise State's quarterback without looking it up.
No clue. No clue if he's any good. I know that Genty should win the Heisman Trophy, in my opinion. I think he's been phenomenal. But when you're just a one-headed monster and you've got a team that's designed to stop that kind of offense, where do you pivot? And I think Penn State's pretty good on defense in the back secondary as well. Now, the question is can Penn State score enough? Like I said, that was the probably perfect game that Penn State can play, especially on offense. Their quarterback is shaky at best, and he just had things going the right way. And it felt like when they were down, he was finding a way, and that's just not something that he's done really all of his career. So if you can get him out of rhythm, who knows? Maybe you can win in a kind of a rock fight style game if you're Boise State, but I don't know. I just think I'm going back to Indiana. My guess is it's Penn State. But you got 3 games that you'll probably be the underdog in, but if you're looking at them, you got to feel pretty good if you're sitting in the Indiana locker room.
Yeah, I'll say this. If Indiana gets past both Notre Dame and Georgia and your third opponent is Penn State, I think it would depend on what each of the results for both teams looks like to determine who would actually be favored in that game. Because if Indiana, I mean, again, I'm throwing out a theoretical. This is not what I'm predicting happens. Let's say Indiana beats Notre Dame by 10, beats Georgia by 7 or 8, something like that. And then Penn State squeaks by SMU by like 3, and then beats Boise State by like 6. I think you may see Indiana favored in that semifinal matchup if that's how it were to play out. Again, how likely is that to happen? Probably not likely at all, honestly.
Yeah.
But why not talk about it?
Yeah, I just think because of the logo we wear on our helmet, we will be not favored, is my guess. But who knows, man? That's in the semifinal for the national. The Indiana Hoosiers are playing football for the national championship, and they got
What's crazy is that they got to win 4 games to do it. I mean, that's not a short road by any stretch. That's a third of a regular season right there.
Exactly, and I think that's where the last thing I want to touch on is everybody talking about Penn State's path being easier than a team that has a bye. It's just not correct. It's a whole nother game against a really good player.
It's a whole nother chance to get injured.
Correct. These are really big people that are running really fast right into each other. The least amount of times you can do that over the course of 3 or 4 games, the advantage is always going to come to the team that plays 3 games. I don't care if Oregon has to play Tennessee or Ohio State and Penn State's got to play Little Sisters of the Poor. If you have to play again, it's not an advantage. And that's just my opinion.
I think you're right. And that's like when people have been arguing about like, should conference champions get the buys no matter what? I kind of think that should be the case. And I understand why people don't think so because they want the best teams to have the buys. But when you're already playing in your conference championship game, that's already an extra game that some of the teams don't have to play. So you should definitely, even though, Big 12 might not be as good as the Big 10 of the SEC, you should be rewarded for playing that extra game and then winning that extra game and be able to sit out a little bit longer for, again, winning said game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm good with the auto bids, but the buys, I'm out.
So you're telling me you think Arizona State should have to play in one of these first round games?
Yes.
If that's fine, I'm just.
Yes. That's just. So now I'm going to.
I agree, they're not one of the 4 best teams, but right. I think by winning your conference and being one of the top 4, I get what the committee's going for by rewarding these buys for that scenario.
Yeah, definitely. What they were trying to do makes a lot of sense, but the way that it's played out has showed that it just isn't the best way to handle it. I think that you should I'm good with 5 auto bids. but they have to fall somewhere in the 1 through 12. And if you win the Big Ten or you win the SEC and you're number 1 in the country, you can have a bye. If you win the ACC, you're number 4 in the country, you can have a bye. But let's say, like this year, Arizona State doesn't, and what they did maybe earns them. I don't think it gets them all the way to number 4, but I mean, that's a really good team right now. Top 6, top 7 type team. What they just did to Iowa State was borderline criminal. They dominated them start to finish. So a lot of it, it's unfortunate they are all the way back at 15 because of their conference. I'm kind of doing what the SEC does right now, which I don't like. But just because and I think that the problem is all the conferences really aren't equal. There's a lot of years where the SEC deserved 7 teams in the college football playoff if it was this format. So it just, I think you need to find a way to, even if it's just the top 7. And somehow, I guess that wouldn't even make sense. I was going to say the top 7 aren't conference champions, but one of them would definitely be conference champions. That my brain was like misfiring right there. The top 4 teams in the country, regardless, need to get the bye. And I just think that makes, or reseed everything.
You mean after the first round?
Or if this is the way we want to do it, then reseed it. That's fine.
Yeah. I don't really have. I know there's a lot of people who have issue with the way that things played out and the way that the format is. I particularly don't have an issue, but maybe it's because my team really everything about worked out as well as it could have. So maybe that's a biased opinion. One other thing though, I do want to mention that confused me about the way the seeding worked with the final auto bid, and that was of course Clemson. They beat SMU. Yet they're the 12 and SMU is the 11. What the hell is that?
Yeah, this is a product of a season, not a product of a game. I know the head-to-head is what it is, but Clemson has looked terrible twice, and SMU looked pretty good in both of their losses. I'm trying to rationalize it. I'm not.
No, that's fair. That's a fair argument.
Clemson has been really good in like 8 games this year. I think they had 2 games where they were just average and still won, and 2 games that they got run through, like, through a goose. They set themselves back. This is a standings rather than a rankings issue. So if they were just rankings and you took everything as a blank slate week to week, yeah, of course, Clemson's going to be above SMU. But because of the way that Clemson started the season and the things that have happened over the course of 12 games, they've set themselves so far back that it doesn't make sense for, like, the game wasn't that much of a difference to allow them to meet each other. It just go smoke them or don't lose. The key to all of this is win your games.
Yeah.
That's it. Win your games.
All the teams bitching, they lost their games. They lost some games.
Yeah. If you're mad, you lost to teams that were 6-6. Pretty much all,
for that matter.
Pretty much all the teams that are mad. Ole Miss, South Carolina, they lost to LSU,
Alabama.
I think. Alabama did it twice. And Miami. And Miami lost, I guess their losses aren't as bad, 8-4 and 9-3, whatever it was. But
it feels like nobody's talking about Miami either.
Yeah, they got jobbed is what happened. They got.
I don't feel like anyone. They completely. It's not that they like. I agree that they shouldn't be in, but as much as they talked about Alabama, it surprised me that I felt like there was zero talk about Miami.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about quality losses, Miami's were far superior. Like not
to
even
both of the teams that they were talking about, or all 3, whatever it might have been.
Yeah, and it's not even close. It's not even close. They lost by less than a touchdown to 2 teams. Georgia Tech team that went to Georgia that now is SEC champion and had them on the ropes, took them to 8 overtimes. Miami lost to that team in Georgia Tech's building. And they lost to a Syracuse team that's put up 1 million points and have the leading passer in the country, lost to them in their building on the last game of the year. Yeah, nobody wants to talk about that because it's SEC, but I mean, the reality is that probably should have 3 ACC teams in, and that would have moved Indiana out.
I would say that'd knock Indiana out.
So we don't like that. So I'm not complaining. But yeah, that's what I think should be the case. But you also can't knock Indiana out. So you can't. There's no win.
Yeah.
Miami, what happened should have happened. Miami out, Alabama out, Ole Miss out, South Carolina out. That's the way it should have played out, and it did. If you want to be in, win your games, especially the games against 8-4 or 6-6 type teams. Win your games.
There you have it. And one last thing I want to say before we wrap this thing up, and I'm currently dancing around it because my mind is going on a journey in a circle, and I can't remember what my point was as we're trying to wrap this thing up at 10 o'clock p.m. on a Sunday.
Yes, sir.
And I hate it. What was I going to say? And I don't want to have to cut this part out because we're at the very end. But it's honestly not super relevant. I was just hoping that I would eventually, find my way back to my thought as I was talking through it. But I don't know that I'm going to, Mitchell, and maybe that's kind of sad. I'll give you some what are your closing thoughts on really just Indiana? Maybe I can figure out what I was going to say before we wrap this thing up.
Yeah. I think it's a call to Indiana fans. I know it's expensive, but we got to paint that place. That place got to be cream and crimson, singing it down 31 with a victory in our back pocket when we're coming home. What a fun year. Unbelievable that we're talking about this and not what we've been talking about for 3 straight years.
So horrible.
I mean, this is why you're a fan of stuff. It feels like it never happens to you. Well, it is. It's happening to you.
There's not been many more miserable college football fan bases specifically than Indiana.
This is what we're going to lead with. This is why I got so fired up about the fan bases from the stupid school in South Bend. Someone replied to my tweet today. They came to my Twitter, had no hashtags, no nothing. They searched a word, came to my profile about Indiana, how excited we were, whatever. I think it was something more like we're going to kill Notre Dame, bloodbath or something. So it was pretty suggestive. But he replied that we don't have a real fan base. I'm like, dude, are you stupid? This might be the realest fan base in all of college football. We've lost 713 times. And we still keep coming back for more. There is nobody that's more real than us. It's about time we get rewarded.
It is.
And that's why I know the tickets are expensive. We got to find a way to take over that place because it's going to be amazing. I can't wait. I hope they come out in their green jerseys. I think they should.
Because they suck, right? It's kind of a Christmassy matchup. You'd have red and green right there a few days before Christmas.
I think if we could get the green jerseys, the color combination, work of art. Except Indiana will wear white on the road, which sucks.
You think so?
Yeah, white's the
what
road
if
color.
What if it's snowing? Do you think they'd wear red just to make it easier to see? No.
It's the Boise State effect. Got to be sneaky.
By the way, I remember I was going to say I hope the SEC loses all 3 of their games
immediately.
In the playoff. Yeah.
Immediately. And then we TP Greg Sankey's house.
By the way, shout out to Kirby Smart for blatantly calling out Greg Sankey right in front of his face after they won the SEC championship the other night. That was pretty funny. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. This is a long segment, but I appreciate your time. I had fun. This was more, again, like of a celebration of, Indiana getting to where they are right now. And
yeah, man,
this is great. Look forward to doing it next week, of course, as well.
Can't wait.
Big thanks to Mitchell Paige for, as always, taking some time to come on. And I'm sure he's had just as much fun. If not, he's probably had more fun than any of us, right? Him being a former, player and alumni of Indiana. And he's seen, you just heard us talk about it with the fact that, Indiana has been through so many horrible seasons, and the fact that many of us have been around and just dealt with it and not jumped ship and, been like some of those, the fans that he was talking about, the Notre Dame football combined with Indiana basketball fans. We don't want none of that around here anymore, right? It's nonsense. So, again, excited about Indiana football. We may talk a bit more about it here in a bit. I'm going to do some YouTube comments, go through a few of those as after we finish up the basketball discussion. But I do want to transition into that now because, as I've now mentioned a couple of times, another important stretch here for Indiana men's basketball as they do what they need to do in their last couple of non-conference games, beat up on the teams that they're supposed to, and albeit not always very pretty. And that's where a lot of the criticism has come from, of course. And now you're going to enter conference play for the week today, and then you'll go on the road at Nebraska on Friday. And you've heard us mention this a few different times, but Indiana probably needs, I hate to say needs, because then that makes it seem like there's no room for error. In a lot of cases, there isn't, but there's still a lot of season ahead. And the fact that, here's the thing, if Indiana can go 2-0 this week, they definitely need to win tonight. You're facing Minnesota at home, with Minnesota being, at least as of right now, one of the not so good looking teams throughout the Big Ten. They're currently 6-4. They played one conference game already, and they lost to Michigan State at home 90-72. And now they're going, of course, now coming to Bloomington tonight for their road game in their section of 2 games before they go back into non-conference play. But this is a good opportunity for Indiana to continue to find some momentum for itself going into this, really the only tough stretch for the remainder of the calendar year. Because after you get through Minnesota and Nebraska, I mean, while I'm pulling up this schedule real quick, I mean, there's not really any marquee matchups to speak of. I mean, there's really only a couple left after that in general. So after they face Nebraska on Friday, they'll have an 8-day, a little buffer between games. They'll face Chattanooga on the 21st, which is the day after Indiana's playoff match against Notre Dame. I was actually talking about this with Kyler. I don't remember if this was during the live recording or afterward, but likely going to be a very sleepy atmosphere in Simon Scott Assembly Hall whenever Chattanooga comes to town for a couple of reasons. It's Christmas break for one, so you don't have the students in the basketball arena. And then on top of that, the day before, those who are around, they're going to be traveling up to South Bend for a late night kick at 8 p.m. And many of them probably won't come back, have much of a desire to watch a non-conference basketball game that features an opponent that you should, take care of business against. But it goes back to what I said earlier. It's the effect of when your football team is good, basketball becomes kind of second fiddle, even though Indiana basketball is the traditional power sports program in Bloomington. This is something we've never seen before. I mean, I know I relate things, a lot to, Louisville and Kentucky, but down here where I'm at, they're all checked. I mean, football's done for them. Kentucky football has been irrelevant all season long. And now that they're having this resurgence with Mark Pope, I mean, they're locked in. I mean, you're seeing it's been basketball season for over a month. Like that's all they've cared about. And rightfully so, whenever your football team is subpar. And Louisville, they've had a good season, of course, but they're just getting ready for a bowl game where they're likely going to have some opt-outs. And, and I'm not trying to compare Indiana basketball to Louisville basketball culturally. Maybe that's what I'm doing. And we've already seen Indiana and Louisville play and how that would, work out. But point being, I was talking about the lack of attendance or a good atmosphere. I don't think that will be the case tonight with Minnesota, of course. But as I was saying, with this being a big stretch, and then you have Chattanooga and then Winthrop, I didn't mention that earlier. Those are your final 2 non-conference games before you fully dive in to conference play for the remainder of the season back on January 2nd when Rutgers comes to Bloomington. And then we'll see what happens from there. But Indiana needs to find a way to go 2-0. Beginning tonight, they'll face a Gopher team. I already mentioned they're 6-4. Dawson Garcia, their leading scorer right now, 19 points a game. They also have a couple of other guys who average double figures. Is his name Lucy or is it Lucy? His last name is Patterson, so we'll just refer to him as Patterson. He averages 10 points, and Mike Mitchell Jr. also averaging 10 points. It's crazy. They got three guys. They're three leading scorers, and it comes out to an even number of points per game, and it's not like a decimal or anything like that, especially when we think about the fact that we're 10, 11 games into the season. So I don't really know what Minnesota's strength is. They seem to be a team that hasn't really found their footing so far this season. And some would say Indiana hasn't found their footing. One thing I would look forward to tonight as an Indiana fan, like what to watch for. Just look for the guards to take another step in the right direction. I think we're going to begin. I think we should see a bounce back performance from Mackenzie Mbako. Him not really being the star of the show last game against Miami of Ohio, and he doesn't need to be. But I am firmly in the camp of thinking that Mackenzie Mbako, his success and the level at which he performs night in and night out, I think that will likely play a big factor in how and in what Indiana basketball's ceiling is this year. And some may disagree with that, and even I may change my mind on that. But because many people will say, "Oh, it's Miles Rice, it's the guards; they need to really take a step forward," and I agree with that. But I think if there's one particular player on your roster that has the ability to take over a game and kind of make it not all about him, because it's not really like, I'm not trying to say he's a selfish player, but if there's one guy, and definitely in tonight's game between Indiana and Minnesota, that if there's a big shot that needs to be made, it wouldn't surprise me if Mackenzie Mbako, if he's the guy having a particularly good game, you're going to want the ball in his hands regardless down the stretch. Now, I don't think this is a game where you're going to see that, but it's also a game where maybe if he takes over early, then you could say he's the reason that Indiana was to get ahead by 20, 25 points. Now, looking at the spread for this game, because I'm sitting here saying this, is I doubt it's something that large for a conference game. And Indiana favored by 10.5. I think that seems fair based on the results that we've seen so far. Over under set at 139.5. Won't be betting on this game more than likely, but I think Indiana, they could do themselves a favor by not only covering that spread, but by never leaving it in doubt. We've seen Indiana over the course of Mike Woodson's tenure kind of play to their competition, and I know Minnesota is a conference opponent, but they're more along the same lines in what you saw with a South Carolina whenever Indiana played them earlier on in the season. They're that level of conference opponent. South Carolina, if you haven't kept up with them, they're probably the lowliest team in the SEC right now. And maybe that doesn't mean they're horrible, but the SEC is probably the best conference in basketball this year, as much as I don't like to admit that. The SEC's got, 4 teams currently in the top 10 and maybe a few more in the top 25 if I had it right in front of me. But the SEC's good, and they've invested a lot in basketball, and it'll be interesting to see if they, if that holds up, if they're able to kind of run the table all year long. But anyway, Minnesota kind of fits that same vein as a South Carolina. They're kind of a step behind everybody else, and Indiana can do a lot for themselves by, at least when it comes to, like, psychologically, you want to show, your fans, you want to show yourself that you are the superior opponent in a game like tonight. Because if you struggle against Minnesota, knowing that you're going on the road against an always pesky Nebraska team, that's not going to fare well for you, as that team has had your number the last couple of years. They kind of, I was going to say put a bow on your season, but they really just kicked you out the door whenever you lost to them in the Big Ten tournament last year. And of course, the infamous Mike Woodson technical that took place at the very end. And it was, gosh, what an embarrassing moment that was, kind of the ending your season like that. And hopefully we don't go down that path again this year, but big week. It's a big week for Indiana basketball. And again, it starts tonight. We'll have post-game coverage. Myself and Kyler Staley will do a post-game wrap-up, let you know our thoughts on what happened after the game. And again, hopefully it's a good result. But if we have to have the difficult conversations, I hope we don't. We will. But The first sign of that was whenever they got blown out by Louisville, and thankfully they've found a way to rebound since that game, as well as Gonzaga. And I don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but I saw something come out the other day, and I don't know if this is because of the Dan Hurley comments, but mentioning that MTEs are outdated. And again, I don't know if that comes from because of what UConn's head coach said, but MTEs aren't going anywhere. Maybe I'm dead wrong about that. But again, those multi-team events are also made for TV events. And I don't say that jokingly. That's legitimately why. Like, you have those during the holiday season because they're what people love to consume. If you're not watching college football or the NFL, you're more than likely watching college basketball. And whenever the big name teams are playing in those are going to be eye catchers, of course. So I don't think those MTEs are going anywhere. I don't know who put that out or where it came from, but I thought it was a little bit of nonsense. All right, let's wrap up a Monday edition with a little bit of YouTube. Almost said reader questions. This is a watcher platform, a viewer platform, right? But we'll start off with a YouTube comment from Agent All-Star 7. He says, here's my question for the week. Why is the Indiana media so afraid to state the obvious that Mike Woodson is not the man for the job? No one believes he could lead IU to a national championship. So why the hesitation? Afraid of losing access or being blackballed? I can't think of one IU fan or media who thinks that Woodson can hang banner number 6, and that's what the program needs. A lot to unpack there. So we'll try to take this piece by piece. So you mentioned, why are they afraid to state the obvious? I think a lot of that is you kind of answered the question in your comment, right? I mean, here's a prime example. You mentioned afraid of losing access or being blackballed. First of all, I'm not in that camp. I don't have access. I don't need access. I don't live in Bloomington. Now, granted, Hoosier Illustrated in some way, shape, or form has access, but that does not include me. I say whatever I want, and I'm not typically too harsh one way or the other unless I feel like it's, something needs to be said. And I haven't really had to do that so far this year. Maybe on very rare occasions, like, again, the Bahamas trip, but that doesn't mean that there won't be more to come, as I kind of suspect there might be. But yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is go back to the spring, or maybe it might have been summertime. Either way, it doesn't matter. Whenever the Hoosier Hysterics were, they had that meeting. One of the guys had that meeting with Mike Woodson and basically told them they were canceling all the different NIL type of events that they were helping to host because there was the negativity surrounding the basketball program, and he was blaming it on them. And I'm not getting into the weeds of what all was said. I'm not going to go deep dive into that right now. That was a big storyline during the offseason. Because if any of that was true, which I kind of think that it was based on the way that Mike Woodson carried himself at that point during the year. Mike Woodson thinks that he, at least at that point, thought he was untouchable. And I don't know if it seems so naive for anybody to think that, whether they're an alumni or not. But I do think being afraid of not being allowed into, assembly hall or into media rooms or whatever that may be, press conferences, I think there is some truth to that. You also mentioned no one believes that Indiana could lead, or that Mike Woodson could lead Indiana to a national championship. At this point, I would say that a majority of fans and media would think that's the case. But there is a group that, holds out hope. I tend to fall into that camp sometimes. But I think now that I even mentioned this before, now that I've seen what Indiana football has with Curt Cignetti and what a good head coach looks like, it makes it all the more obvious the flaws that are within Mike Woodson and the basketball program, right? I think before that, it was easier to kind of, I don't want to say play dumb, but maybe not be as aware of how, I don't want to say unfit, but just maybe not national championship caliber Mike Woodson is or will be. And you like one way that you kind of see that, and I don't think maybe these people realize they're doing it. And again, I've said this too, is that when people say the goal for this year is for Indiana to get to the second weekend, that's not usually the goal for Indiana basketball at all, right? Yes, it would be a step in the right direction, and you could build off of that in future seasons. But when you're Indiana basketball, the goal should always be to get to the Final Four, right? Now, that's been so long since that's happened. So maybe it just feels like that shouldn't be the goal until you take another baby step forward. But that's kind of how I've been able to ration, like why people think, that's why Mike Woodson sticks around. And if he fails this year at taking that step forward, I think he absolutely has to, make the tournament and have a team that not just squeaks by, but have a team that looks the part. Because so far this year, they've not looked the part. And they're going to have their chance, again, beginning this week. And then as the rest of conference play moves forward in January and beyond, they'll have their chance to prove that they belong. And if they don't, whether Mike Woodson thinks so or not, then that'll more than likely be the end of his time in Bloomington as the head coach. Of course, he'll always be welcome back as a former player. And hopefully this doesn't, if it doesn't work out, hopefully it doesn't sour his relationship with the university. But it'll be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. But thanks for the question, Agent All-Star. It's very, it's a big topic because a lot of people, I don't want to say are afraid of Mike Woodson because I don't believe that's true. But Mike Woodson does kind of have this ego about him that's good but bad because Curt Cignetti has an ego too, and that could eventually bite him in the butt if things go south. But so far, everybody loves it because he's done no wrong, and I don't blame him. So maybe we'll dive into that conversation again in the future, but I do want to get to a couple more questions before we wrap things up. This is from Randy Chester. He says, Notre Dame fan since 1970, but he's from Tennessee. Don't know about other Irish fans, but he definitely doesn't take Indiana lightly. This will be a very tough game for Notre Dame, and he's nervous about it, especially because Cignetti is just awesome. He's been defending Indiana against all the haters, mostly SEC fans desperate to find a path for their team. The disrespect Indiana gets is ridiculous, expecting a great game. Good luck to both teams. Well, shout out to you, Mr. Randy Chester. You sound like a very reasonable Notre Dame fan. And to live down in Tennessee in the heart of volunteer country, SEC country in general, Tennessee volunteer fans are some of the most vicious human beings on planet Earth. And I say that kind of jokingly, but there's not a lot of fan bases that just kind of have their own personality that is unlike anything else. They're one of them. Nebraska football is another one of them. And a lot of good people, especially on the Nebraska side. But Tennessee, man, I don't know what it is, but they're just, you're doing the Lord's work down there, Randy Chester, by battling it out with the SEC and Tennessee fans. But yeah, I look forward to the Notre Dame game. I know you commented on the talking about the Hoosiers live show yesterday, and who knows if you're watching this, but we talked a lot about the matchup and how well does Indiana's passing attack, how will it match up with Notre Dame's rushing attack, and how will the weather conditions factor in. Right now, when I made my prediction, I said Notre Dame 24-21. I don't want to believe that's the case. I do think Indiana has the personnel and capability to beat a Notre Dame, especially, and again, maybe this is an irrelevant thing to bring up, but when you see they lost to a MAC team in Northern Illinois, that should just give you all the answers. Like, okay, when Notre Dame doesn't play to their strength, anybody can beat them. And I'm not saying Indiana isn't anybody because they're a step above just some rando team from the MAC. But Notre Dame has figured things out, as I mentioned as well the other day. They've hung 40-plus points over the last several games, and it's going to be a battle of two really good offenses next Friday. And it's probably going to be a game that comes down to, this may sound cliche and just kind of a cop-out answer. I hope it doesn't. But whichever team makes the least amount of mistakes in that game is going to win and move on to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So looking forward to that, and appreciate the comment, Randy. And I do want to answer one more. It's a pretty simple question, and then we'll wrap up today's episode. David Martin says Sig might be wanting to have at least two quarterbacks with experience, and that's why he's going to look at the portal. That goes back to what I said the other day. Somebody had asked Cignetti in one of the press conferences whether or not he would go into the transfer portal to look for an experienced quarterback for next year because you're going to lose Curtis Rourke. And I always thought that Taven Jackson, with the amount of experience that he had already gotten this season, then on top of what he did in the year before with Tom Allen, I thought he would be primed and developed, ready to be the guy, the quarterback in waiting for next season. But why waste an opportunity to find somebody who has proven themselves in the portal, especially when your offense and the quarterback position in general is as hot as it's ever been? The amount of guys in the transfer portal that will want a piece of this, Indiana pie, if you will, it's unlike anything that you could have ever expected. So it's unfortunate for guys like Taven Jackson. But here's the thing. Just because Cignetti grabs somebody in the portal, depending on who it is, it doesn't mean that they're going to land the starting job. Like last year with Curtis Rourke and Taven Jackson, that was a quarterback battle. Just went to Curtis Rourke. Now, one thing that we have to be aware of, though, is now that, and maybe Taven Jackson already knew this, but with Taven Jackson only having 2 years of eligibility remaining after this season, he's going to be thinking about his future as well. He was somebody coming out of high school who was a fringe 4 or 5-star player, went to Tennessee, didn't work out there, came to Indiana, got a chance, and now he's kind of been sitting behind the starters for a couple of years. But he knows his clock is ticking. And if he wants to be able to prove himself to potentially move on to the next level of the NFL, there's a chance he may want to test the waters elsewhere. And why not? When there's no rules about transferring right now, there's no reason to expect that he wouldn't do something like that. It's either that or hope you win the quarterback battle against whoever this new QB is out of the portal. So now, really at this point, it wouldn't surprise me to see that happen. Because what will end up happening is, more than likely, this is what I'm predicting right now. Cignetti will find somebody who, I'm not going to name anyone specifically. I haven't done a deep dive into quarterbacks that will be in the portal or not. But Cignetti will find somebody who fits his system. Taven Jackson will see the writing on the wall, and he'll likely jump in the transfer portal and find somebody who needs him more than Indiana needs him, right? And then that leaves an opportunity for guys like Tyler Cherry, Alberto Mendoza, the young guys, to step into that primary backup position. But again, it just feels like it's an endless cycle, because down the road, because I don't know how many years of eligibility the hypothetical transfer we're talking about would have left, but it feels like we're entering a new era where if you're a freshman quarterback, or really almost a freshman in any position, and you're not ready to see the field immediately, how are you going to find your way on the field when Cignetti and other coaches similar are always going to value production over potential? That's almost, maybe it's the recipe for success in this era of college football. Of course, it worked in year one for Cignetti. But it's unfortunate for the younger guys, because it's a much more difficult for the freshmen and sophomores to navigate college football and college sports in general whenever it's so easy for coaches to plug and play guys who already have experience, whether it be at the G5 or the Power 4 level. So good question, or a good comment, I should say, David. And that'll be something interesting to keep an eye on in as we move into the offseason after the college football playoffs over with. So I think we're going to wrap up today's episode with that. I appreciate you sticking around, and of course appreciate Mitchell for coming on today as well. We will do this again on Wednesday. We'll react to Indiana basketball's result against Minnesota tonight. And I've got a couple of things in mind that will, in terms of who I may reach out to have conversations with. So hopefully that works out well for me and for the show. And look forward to doing this again on Wednesday. Again, subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube if you enjoyed everything you heard today, or you didn't have to enjoy everything, but maybe you just enjoyed the show. Subscribe and leave a comment. Appreciate those who do that. And follow me on Twitter if you want. You don't have to. My Twitter is not the most fun place. It usually just involves me talking about the game or retweeting other people's thoughts about the game, quite frankly. So, but until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.